Adrian had been driving across Nevada's desert highways for hours when the world around him began to dissolve into silence. The radio had gone dead miles back, and his GPS flickered before surrendering to a blank gray screen. Dust coiled in the headlights, and with each mile marker, the sense that he was leaving familiar geography behind deepened. He told himself he was just tired, but a sliver of unease threaded into his thoughts. Then came the sign. Rusted, tilted at an angle that suggested the earth was trying to bury it, the board carried fading letters. Bodie, 7 miles. He almost drove past it, but something in his chest tugged. A strange curiosity he could not explain. He had heard the name whispered before. Bodie, the ghost town preserved in decay. A place locals avoided at night. A place where miners once struck gold and later bled into the dirt. The gravel road narrowed, crunching beneath his tires, every bend in the trail making him feel more separated from the rest of the world. The sun dropped low, bruising the sky with violet and blood-red streaks. When he finally rolled through a skeletal wooden arch, he felt his breath catch. Bodie emerged from the gloom like a corpse half buried in sand. Buildings leaned against each other, their windows glassless and hollow like sockets. Roofs had caved in, yet stubbornly clung to beams that refused to collapse. An entire town, suspended between life and ruin. Adrian parked, stepped out, and immediately felt it. The weight of silence pressing against his ears. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but a silence that seemed to breathe. He walked the main street. Boards groaned under his boots, though the air was perfectly still. It almost felt as if the town remembered footsteps and continued to echo them long after its people were gone. A whisper of wind tugged at his jacket, carrying with it the faint smell of rust, ash, and something metallic, like old blood. Inside the saloon, shadows clung stubbornly to the corners. Tables were still set, glasses cracked and warped by time. A piano sat crooked, one ivory key pressed down though no hand rested upon it. The single tone hummed faintly, vibrating the floorboards. Adrian froze, his skin crawling. He whispered into the air, "Hello?" His voice came back softer, distorted, as though another mouth had spoken it in a slightly different pitch. The schoolhouse offered no comfort either. Chalk dust clung to the board. A half-finished equation scrawled across it as if the lesson had ended mid-thought. He ran his hand across the desk only to pull away sharply. Heat lingered on the wood, faint but undeniable. Then came a sound, children's laughter. Faint, layered, like several voices playing together. It drifted from the hall, paused, and then came again, sharper, mocking. Adrian's chest tightened. Back outside, the street had changed. Shadows stretched too far across the dust, longer than the sinking sun should allow. He reached for his phone, but the screen spasmed with static before going black completely. When he lowered it, he saw footprints in the dirt, fresh, deep, headed toward the far end of town. They were his own size, his exact tread. Heart pounding, he followed them. The path ended at a wooden church, its door ajar, swinging lightly. Adrian pushed it open. Rows of pews stood in silence, angled toward a pulpit draped in torn fabric. He scanned the room and felt foolish relief until his eyes fell on the far left pew. Someone was sitting there. No, not someone. Himself. Adrian's double sat with head bowed, hands folded as though in prayer. The figure slowly lifted its face. The features were his, but subtly wrong. Skin stretched pale, mouth slightly too wide, eyes that gleamed with a wet sheen. It smiled faintly, and Adrian's body locked in place. The church moaned, timbers bending as though inhaling. Adrian stumbled back, but when he burst outside, Bodie had shifted again. The familiar street was gone, replaced with another row of structures he did not recognize. It was as if the town had rearranged itself like a maze designed to hold him. He turned, and the figure emerged from the church. Its gait was slow, deliberate, as though it knew escape was an illusion. Shadows stretched unnaturally from its feet, fingers of black that crawled toward Adrian like hungry roots. He ran, but in Bodie, every road folded back upon itself. Every corner only led him deeper. By the time he stopped, lungs burning, he realized the town was alive, reshaping itself around him. He was not a visitor here. He was part of the story now, and stories in Bodie never ended. Adrian leaned against the warped wall of an abandoned store, chest heaving as if the air itself had thickened into syrup. Every inhale scraped his throat raw, every exhale steamed like smoke in the night air. Bodie was no longer a town frozen in history. It was a beast, breathing in silence, reshaping itself each time he dared to blink. The main street stretched before him, lanterns that had not been lit for a century flickering to life, one by one, as if guiding him forward. He pressed his palm against the glass of the cracked window beside him, but the reflection that stared back wasn't his own. The eyes were hollow, ringed with ash, and its mouth formed words he couldn't hear. He stumbled back, whispering, "This isn't real," the town answered. Somewhere in the distance, a fractured bell rang, not once but 3 times. The sound was jagged, like metal dragged across stone, and each toll rattled through his bones. Compelled by dread and curiosity, Adrian moved toward the sound, his boots crunching over gravel that seemed to shift beneath him. Curtains twitched in windows, though no wind stirred. He glimpsed silhouettes in doorways, men in wide-brimmed hats, women in long skirts, yet when he looked again, the thresholds were empty. Shadows lengthened faster than they should, crawling toward him like spilled ink. The bell's lure pulled him toward the old cemetery. The gates groaned as he pushed them open, hinges screaming as though protesting his intrusion. Rust streaked the iron bars like dried blood. Rows of headstones leaned at impossible angles, and some graves were marked only by wooden stakes gnawed with age. Kneeling, Adrian brushed dirt from one marker. The stone was blank at first, but as his hand lingered, faint letters scratched themselves across the surface, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Adrian Miller, 2023. His breath caught. The letters pulsed as if alive. Then the ground beneath his hand shifted, soil loosening like something beneath it had stirred. A muffled knock echoed from below, rhythmic and deliberate. Then came a whisper, soft and desperate. "Let me out." Adrian's body rebelled. He staggered backward, but the path behind him stretched like a hallway without end. From the graves rose figures, not whole but pieced together, eyeless sockets dripping shadows, mouths sewn shut with coarse twine. They turned in unison toward him. The ground collapsed, swallowing him whole. He fell into darkness, his scream bouncing off narrow stone walls until he landed hard on damp earth. He lay gasping in what he realized was an abandoned mine shaft, the air thick with dust and the faint metallic tang of iron or blood. Somewhere in the tunnel, voices began to chant. The words were distorted, as though dragged backward through water. Pickaxes clanged in rhythm, then silence. A scraping sound followed, closer and closer. Adrian lit the battered oil lamp hanging on a beam. Its flame quivered, throwing trembling shadows. Carvings etched into the wooden supports caught his eye. "Don't go deeper." Another beam read, "He will find his own reflection." The lamp sputtered. Adrian froze. Ahead, crouched in the shadows, was a figure. Its eyes widened as the flame flared, and in a voice identical to Adrian's, it whispered, "This isn't real." "It can't be real." The lamp slipped from his hand, crashing to the ground. Darkness engulfed him. Then hands, cold, rough, human yet not, pressed against his arms and shoulders, guiding him deeper into the mine, though he fought to resist. When the light returned, it wasn't from the lamp. He was standing in a parlor of a strange house, its wallpaper peeling, mirrors cracked but reflecting. Each mirror showed a version of him that wasn't right. One smiled, though his lips stayed still. Another sat slumped, asleep in a bed he'd never seen. The last reflected him kneeling in prayer, muttering in a language he didn't understand. From upstairs came the groan of a board. The sound was deliberate, like a footstep. He climbed the staircase, each step moaning under his weight. At the top, a single door glowed faintly with flickering candlelight. He pushed it open. Inside was a child's room. Dusty toys lined the shelves. A diary lay open on the desk. He read, his hands trembling. September 14th. He came again. He wears my father's face now. I don't know if I'm awake. The bed in the corner stirred. Beneath the threadbare blanket lay a small figure, breathing steadily. Adrian hesitated, then pulled the cover back. His own younger face stared up at him, asleep, peaceful. The child's eyes snapped open, pupils dilating until they filled the sockets entirely. Adrian stepped back, heart pounding, but the boy smiled with his own mouth and whispered, "You're the dream, not me." Adrian staggered forward, his breath catching in his throat as he realized the tunnel hadn't ended with the mirror. Instead, it curved downward, deeper into the earth. The stale air was damp, and each step sent echoes that didn't belong to him. Sometimes the echoes came too quickly, as though someone else's footsteps trailed just half a pace behind. He turned sharply more than once, only to see nothing except the rough timber supports and the veins of quartz glimmering faintly under the dim light. His flashlight flickered. The beam danced across the mine walls, illuminating scraps of old mining helmets, rusting tools, and graffiti scrawled in chalk. Words that made no sense, words that weren't English. He bent closer to one. It looked like his own name, but twisted, mirrored, written backward. The letters seemed to shift when he blinked. He reached out with shaking fingers, and the chalk smeared as though it had just been written seconds ago. A whisper slipped out of the darkness. Adrian. Not loud, not clear, just a breath brushing against the inside of his skull. He froze. His chest tightened, and he pressed the flashlight beam wildly around the tunnel. Shadows jumped, retreating like startled animals. Then silence. Silence so heavy he thought he could hear the weight of the mountain pressing down. Adrian pressed forward because going back felt impossible. The mine seemed to breathe with him. Inhale, exhale, until he wasn't sure if his lungs were still his own. Each timber groaned as though straining under the burden of decades. He passed an abandoned minecart. Inside lay a child's doll, its porcelain face cracked, one eye missing. He didn't want to touch it, but when he glanced away, he swore the doll's head had turned slightly, watching him. He stumbled deeper, and the whispers returned. More than one voice now, overlapping, too many to separate. Some spoke his name. Others hissed words he couldn't understand. A chorus of half-formed thoughts. They scratched at his mind, trying to pry it open. His heartbeat thudded so loud he thought it might drown them out, but the whispers only grew clearer. At the deepest point, the tunnel opened into a cavern. Black water pooled at the bottom, still as glass. The air was colder here, biting into his skin. He knelt beside the water, shining his light across the surface. At first, he saw only his reflection. Then, without warning, another reflection joined his. A man, his face gaunt, hollow-eyed, cheeks sunken as though drained of all life. It was Adrian, but aged, broken, decayed by years he hadn't lived. The reflection smiled. Its lips cracked open in a way his never would. "You've been here before," it whispered, though its mouth didn't move. The voice came from beneath the water, vibrating in the stone itself. Adrian stumbled backward, nearly dropping his flashlight, but the image didn't vanish. The older version of himself began to climb from the water, not physically. Its body rippled as if made from the reflection alone, but it dragged itself upright in a way that defied the laws of light. Adrian turned and ran. He sprinted through the tunnel, gasping, his footsteps crashing against the stone. The whispers rose behind him, not pursuing with legs but with sound, chasing him faster than he could move. His light blinked out. Darkness swallowed him whole. He could feel hands, or not hands, something colder, brushing his arms, guiding him deeper instead of out. He shouted, but the mine absorbed his voice, returning only a warped echo. "Adrian! Adrian! Stay!" Finally, he burst into another chamber. This one was lined with mirrors, dozens of them, each standing crookedly against the walls. His flashlight sputtered back to life just long enough to reveal himself multiplied 100 times. Except not every reflection followed his movements. Some stared at him when he turned away. Some looked older, younger, twisted, blurred. And one, just one, stepped forward from the glass, leaving no crack, no ripple. It was him, but it wasn't. The doppelganger tilted its head, studying him with quiet amusement. "You left us here," it murmured, though Adrian had never been in this place before. He stepped back, but the wall of mirrors gave no escape. His own eyes reflected back at him, but they weren't his. They were the town's, watching, waiting, hungering. The doppelganger's smile widened until it split too far, revealing rows of teeth that glistened like broken glass. And in the silence of the mine, Adrian realized he could no longer tell which side of the mirror he stood on. Adrian stumbled out of the mine into the open night, gasping as though he had been holding his breath for hours. The cold air slapped his face, sharp and metallic, as if the wind itself had been waiting to greet him. For a moment he believed he had escaped, but when he looked around, the sight hollowed him out. Bodie had returned. The silent streets stretched in every direction, houses leaning like tired skeletons. But something was different. Lanterns burned faintly in windows where there should have been only emptiness. He walked into the town square, boots crunching over gravel. He heard faint laughter, the sound of a piano, the rustle of skirts. Shadows flickered inside the saloon. He pushed the door open, and the sound collapsed into silence. The saloon stood abandoned. Tables overturned, bottles shattered, dust layered thick as frost. Yet the piano keys were still vibrating faintly, like invisible fingers had just played them. Adrian swallowed. His hands trembled as he stepped further inside. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke, even though the hearth was cold. He heard whispers, children laughing upstairs, boots stomping across the balcony. He turned his flashlight upward, but the railings were broken, jagged, no longer able to hold weight. Still, the sounds continued. He felt eyes tracking his every step, not malicious at first, but curious, like old neighbors watching someone return after many years. He left the saloon, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Across the street, houses glowed with faint light. He approached one, drawn by the shape of a figure standing in the window. As he neared, the curtains fell as though snapped shut by an unseen hand. His knuckles brushed the door, and it creaked open before he could knock. The room smelled of iron and damp earth. A dining table lay set with plates of food, steaming hot, though covered in dust that must have taken decades to settle. He blinked, and the food turned rotten, crawling with maggots. He gagged, stumbling back. When he opened his eyes again, the table was empty, bare wood, brittle and dry. Adrian climbed the staircase. The steps moaned, but they did not break. In the upstairs bedroom, a cradle rocked gently. A child's lullaby played faintly, though no instrument was present. He approached, and inside the cradle was not a child, but a journal. Its leather cover cracked with age. His name was carved into the spine. Hands shaking, he opened it. The pages were filled with drawings, maps of Bodie, sketches of mines, faces he didn't recognize. Some of the sketches were crossed out violently. Others were circled, marked with the word return. Then, on the final page, a sentence was scrawled in jagged letters, Adrian never left. He dropped the book. The cradle stopped rocking. The house shifted, groaning as if the walls were inhaling. A deep rumble rolled through the floorboards. He rushed outside only to find the entire street alive. Figures now walked through the dust, men in mining hats, women with shawls, children darting between houses. Their faces were blurred, their movements hazy, but they turned their heads toward him in unison. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, silent watching. Adrian's breath hitched. He backed away, but they didn't follow. Instead, they began to fade, one by one, until only the empty houses remained. Except now every window reflected his face, not theirs. He saw himself multiplied across the ghost town, staring out of glass panes that hadn't been whole for a century. Some versions of him looked alive. Others looked pale, lifeless, already buried. He stumbled to the church at the edge of town. Its steeple leaned, threatening to collapse, but the door stood open, glowing faintly. Inside, rows of pews were filled with shadows, their heads bowed as if in prayer. At the pulpit, a figure raised its head. It was him again, or something that wore his face, its eyes hollow and burning with pale fire. The congregation of shadows lifted their heads in unison, and Adrian felt a pull, like invisible strings tugging at his chest. The church filled with whispers, not loud, but endless, layered, drowning him in voices of the dead who still called Bodie home. He turned and fled into the night, but the town followed. Not the people, not the buildings, but the essence of Bodie itself. The wind carried voices. The ground pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. And Adrian realized that Bodie wasn't just a ghost town. It was alive, and it had noticed him. Adrian's steps dragged him toward the edge of Bodie, where the ground tilted into a desolate graveyard. The wooden crosses leaned at crooked angles, their inscriptions erased by time. A silver light from the half-moon illuminated the stones, but shadows pooled unnaturally deep around the graves, as though the earth refused to release what it held. He hesitated at the gate, a wrought iron arch barely standing, its metal bent and scarred by rust. He told himself not to enter, that crossing the threshold would mean accepting something he wasn't ready to face. Yet his legs moved on their own, carrying him into the graveyard's breathless silence. The air shifted colder, sharper. He swore he could hear the ground itself whispering, syllables buried too deep to fully catch. Rows of headstones stretched endlessly, though Bodie had never been large enough to house so many dead. Names blurred when he tried to read them, the letters crawling into shapes that refused to stay still. Some stones were broken in half, others marked with claw-like scratches, as if something had tried to climb free. His stomach turned as he realized several graves had no markers at all, just hollow pits gaping open, waiting for someone to fill them. Adrian's flashlight flickered. For a moment he stood blind, surrounded only by the hiss of the wind through dry grass. When the beam returned, a figure stood at the far edge of the graveyard. It looked like a child, head bowed, hands clutching a small object. Adrian's throat closed, yet he called out softly, "Are you lost?" The child lifted its face, and it was not a face at all, just a smooth expanse of pale skin. The thing tilted its head, and the object it held dropped with a metallic clang. A miner's helmet, dented and cracked. The whispers swelled. Adrian staggered backward as hands pushed up through the soil around him, bony fingers clawing at the air. Dozens of them, then silence, as though the entire graveyard had inhaled at once. One grave near his feet shifted, the dirt sinking inward, and a coffin lid cracked open beneath the soil. Adrian froze as a hand emerged, followed by an arm, then a body. But the corpse wasn't rotted, it was him. His own face stared up at him, eyes closed, lips moving faintly. The voice was his too, but broken, layered, echoing with 1,000 other tones. "You never left. You never will." The world tilted. He stumbled away, tripping over stones. Everywhere he turned, the graves pulsed, their markers glowing with faint light. Figures stood between them now, miners, mothers, children, all faceless, all watching. Their heads shifted in unison, tracking his every move. He ran toward the church bell in the distance, thinking he could use it as a landmark to escape. But no matter how far he moved, the graveyard stretched on. He was trapped in a loop, his lungs burning, his vision spinning. Finally, he collapsed at a large, blackened cross. The wood smelled of smoke, charred yet unbroken. Beneath it lay a stone slab, freshly carved, though the lettering shimmered like heat on asphalt. He bent closer and read the words that refused to stay still. "Here rests Adrian, the one who returned." The soil below the stone shifted, cracked, and split open. The ground seemed to exhale, releasing a chill that froze his marrow. Something inside was waiting for him, calling him by name. He backed away, his body shaking. The whispers rose again, louder this time, carrying phrases he almost recognized. Prayers, curses, fragments of his own thoughts. They wove together into a single command. "Stay." Adrian screamed and ran, no longer caring where the path led, only desperate to escape the graveyard. But as he sprinted, the crosses bent toward him. The soil erupted with grasping hands, and every step felt heavier, like the earth itself was trying to swallow him whole. At last he broke through the rusted gate, collapsing on the other side. The whispers cut off instantly, leaving only the echo of his heartbeat in his ears. He lay trembling on the dirt, staring at the graveyard beyond the gate. The shadows still writhed among the stones, but they did not cross the threshold. For now he was free. But the slab with his name burned into his memory, and the weight of the grave beneath it pressed against his chest like an invisible stone. He knew the grave was waiting for him, and somehow it had always been his. Adrian's legs barely carried him from the graveyard, his breath ragged, his chest burning as though the cold air had filled him with shards of glass. He followed the main street of Bodie, past collapsed roofs and silent storefronts, until a tall structure loomed ahead, the remains of the town's largest saloon. Its sign, barely legible, swayed in the wind with a screech that made his teeth ache. The doors hung crooked but intact, as though daring him to enter. The moment he stepped across the threshold, everything changed. The night's chill faded, replaced by a stagnant warmth, and the faint hum of voices reached his ears. The saloon interior was no ruin at all. It was alive, frozen in some unnatural tableau. Dozens of figures sat at tables, glasses in hand, cards scattered across the wood. Yet no one moved. They were mannequins of flesh, their eyes wide open but glazed, their smiles plastered in place like masks. A haze of cigar smoke curled through the air, but it didn't rise. It hung mid-motion, suspended in place. Adrian's heartbeat hammered. He moved between the frozen patrons, the floor creaking under his boots. Each face he passed seemed almost familiar, as though fragments of his own memories had been molded into strangers. A woman at the bar had his mother's eyes. A dealer at the card table bore the same scar he once earned in childhood. They stared past him, locked in silence, their drinks unspilled, their laughter caught in their throats. At the far end, a grand piano gleamed, its surface polished, its keys white as bone. A man sat before it, back straight, hands hovering above the keyboard. Adrian felt a pressure in the air, a sense that if the pianist's fingers descended, the silence would shatter. He took a step closer. The man's head turned slowly, unnaturally, until it twisted all the way around. The face was Adrian's own, pale and expressionless. The mouth opened, but no sound came, only a hiss, like wind rattling through empty bottles. The chandelier above trembled. Dust fell like ash. And suddenly the room wasn't frozen anymore. The patrons turned their heads in unison toward him, their jaws creaking open. But instead of voices, a terrible grinding sound spilled out, metal against stone, like gears turning in a machine too large to see. The air thickened, pressing against his skin. He stumbled backward as one of the figures at the table moved, its arm reaching across to reveal a hand made not of flesh, but of splintered wood. Another patron stood, their eyes sinking into their skull, leaving empty holes that wept black smoke. The piano notes struck at last. A jagged melody split the silence, harsh and discordant. Every figure in the saloon jerked, their movements stiff, puppet-like. They swayed in rhythm to the broken tune, knocking over chairs and spilling drinks that vanished before they hit the ground. Adrian clamped his hands over his ears, but the music bypassed his hearing. It was in his head, his bones, rattling through him like chains dragged across stone. He forced himself toward the door, but each step felt heavier. The patrons closed in, their faces splitting into wide, unnatural grins that tore at the edges of their mouths. One of them whispered in a voice identical to his own, "You've played this game before." Another added, "You always return." Their voices overlapped, building into a chorus that matched the jagged piano. He shoved past them, but their bodies stretched, arms elongating like shadows, clutching at his shoulders, his neck, his wrists. Adrian screamed, tearing himself free just as the chandelier crashed to the floor, exploding into shards of glass. The impact silenced the piano. Instantly, everything froze again. The patrons returned to their stillness. Smoke hung motionless, and the pianist sat with his back to him once more. Only Adrian moved, trembling, drenched in sweat. He stumbled through the doors into the night air. Behind him, the saloon's windows glowed faintly, shapes moving in slow rhythm to music only they could hear. The sound lingered in his skull long after silence reclaimed the street. Adrian pressed a hand to his chest, feeling his heart pound. Somewhere deep inside, he wondered if the song hadn't stopped at all, if it had only moved inside him, playing on strings he could not cut. Adrian staggered onward, the echo of the piano still coiling inside his skull like a parasite. Bodie's streets seemed narrower now, the crooked buildings leaning inward as though conspiring to crush him between their skeletal frames. The moon was swallowed by fast-moving clouds, plunging everything into an unnatural gloom. Then he saw it, the yawning mouth of the old mine at the edge of town. Its timbers jutted upward like rotting teeth, the entrance half collapsed but still wide enough to beckon him inside. No wind reached this place. The silence around the mine was heavier than anywhere else in Bodie, oppressive and expectant. A faint glow pulsed from within, not the warm hue of lanterns, but a cold, bluish shimmer, like veins of phosphorescence buried in the rock. Adrian knew he should turn away. Yet something compelled him, pulling at his chest like a magnet, dragging his feet over the gravel and splintered wood. Inside, the air tasted of rust and stone. The walls dripped with moisture that glimmered faintly in the unnatural light. The farther he descended, the more the passage seemed to breathe, narrowing and widening in slow rhythms, the timbers groaning like ribs strained against lungs too large for the body. His footsteps echoed wrong, sometimes ahead of him, sometimes behind, as though someone else walked in tandem, never quite visible. Deeper still, he began to hear them, whispers. They weren't carried by air, but by the very stone, seeping from the walls, bleeding from the floor. He couldn't make out words at first, only the rhythm of voices, dozens overlapping, sliding over each other like waves. Then a few sharpened into clarity. Stay. Bury. Forever. Each word pierced him, lodging in his thoughts as though they were his own. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling vanishing into darkness. Here, the bluish glow pulsed brighter, revealing the remains of machinery long abandoned, carts rusted to skeletons, wheels fused with stone. Yet the ground was littered not only with tools, but with bones. Piles upon piles, some small as children's, some twisted into shapes that looked barely human at all. Adrian's breath hitched. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they formed a low chant that circled him like a living thing. In the center of the chamber stood a figure. At first, Adrian thought it was another miner, a silhouette bent over a pickaxe, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw the truth. It was not flesh. The figure was carved entirely from the stone of the mine itself, but it shifted and pulsed as though alive. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, fixed on him. The whispers swelled into a roar as cracks spread across its surface, jagged lines glowing like molten veins. Adrian stumbled backward, but the chamber itself resisted. The floor rippled like liquid stone, his boots sinking an inch, then two. The bones rattled, aligning themselves into crude shapes, arms reaching, jaws snapping, empty sockets blazing with the same bluish light. One skeleton dragged itself toward him, its jaw opening wide enough to split in half, releasing not a scream but a whisper identical to his own voice. "You belong here." Panic surged. He scrambled, forcing his legs to move, ripping himself free of the half-liquid ground. The whispers rose to a deafening storm, repeating fragments of his own memories, secrets he had buried so deep he had forgotten them. Yet here they were, spoken back to him by 1,000 disembodied throats. He pressed his hands to his ears, but nothing stopped them. They weren't outside, they were inside. The figure in the chamber's center moved again, its stone body cracking open. Within its chest cavity lay a mirror, shimmering with the same unnatural glow. For a heartbeat, Adrian saw his reflection. But it was not the man he knew. This Adrian was older, gaunt, eyes hollow, face streaked with dust and tears, as though he had been trapped in this mine for decades. The reflection raised a finger to its lips and whispered, "Stay." The sound wasn't heard. It bloomed inside his skull like a thought he had always carried. With a violent burst of will, Adrian turned and ran. The ground surged under him, bones clattering, whispers chasing him with relentless hunger. The tunnel seemed endless, stretching and contracting, bending in ways that defied logic. His lungs burned, his throat raw with silent screams. Just as the darkness threatened to consume him, he saw the faint outline of moonlight ahead. With one final push, he hurled himself through the entrance and collapsed onto the cold earth outside. The silence returned instantly. The whispers cut off, as though the mine itself had shut its mouth. Adrian lay gasping on the dirt, staring at the cursed maw behind him. Even as he crawled away, he could feel it watching, waiting, the echo of the chant still vibrating in his bones. The mine did not need to chase him. It knew he would return. They all did. Adrian thought he had finally left the saloon behind. The swing of its frozen doors, the silent bottles on shelves, and the poker game that never ended. He wanted it all behind him. He stepped out into the main street of Bodie Ghost Town, the wind cutting across the wooden planks of abandoned storefronts. At first, the street looked like any other he had crossed since entering this forsaken place. Tilted signs, shattered windows, dust rolling like a tide. Yet something felt off. a strange pressure in the air as if the street itself held its breath. He walked forward. His boots crunched against gravel past the leaning church and the general store. The street bent slightly right. He followed. But as the path straightened, his stomach dropped. There was the same leaning church, the same dusty general store, the same broken trough where a horse should have been. Adrian froze. He looked over his shoulder. Behind him stretched only more desert, as though Bodie had unrolled itself into infinity. The saloon doors he had left swinging seconds ago were gone. The world had shifted without him noticing. A rational mind reached for explanations. Fatigue, dehydration, stress. Perhaps his sense of direction betrayed him. Yet when he scratched a mark into the wooden beam of the general store and walked again, the mark appeared freshly carved the next time he returned. The world looped. The street itself refused to let him go. Shadows began to deepen, though the sun remained high. Windows no longer appeared as shattered glass, but as black squares like eyes painted on buildings. From them came faint whispers, voices he could not recognize, but that repeated his steps with uncanny precision. He would walk, and in that instant he heard the echo of his own boots from empty houses. He breathed, and the sound of breath came back delayed, mocking. Adrian tried running. He sprinted past the church, past the general store, past the trough. The scenery blurred with effort. His lungs burned. Yet when he slowed, the church bell loomed above him again, and dust swirled in the same rhythm. The town was a circle disguised as a street. Panic clawed at him. He ducked into one of the houses, hoping to break the loop. The air inside was colder, sharp with iron and mold. A staircase led up to a hallway lined with doors. He opened one, only to find himself staring out onto the very same street from an upper window, the church across, the general store beside it. Another door led him back outside, directly across from where he had first entered. The architecture was folding on itself, geometry rewritten by some malicious design. Psychological dread mounted. His memories began to betray him. Each loop through the street felt slightly altered. A chair appeared where none had been before. A sign swung with words that blurred into nonsense. Faces in the windows started to resemble his own. When he blinked, the faces blinked back. When he looked away, he sensed them still watching. The longer he stayed, the harder it became to tell whether the street changed or if his mind fabricated the differences. He shouted, a raw attempt to claim control. His voice scattered across the street, echoing endlessly, as if the sound itself was trapped in the loop. Hours, maybe days, seemed to pass, yet the sky refused to darken, refusing him the relief of night. He wondered whether time moved at all here, or if he was pinned inside a single repeating second stretched across eternity. At last, exhaustion forced him to stop. He leaned against the marked beam of the general store, his fingers brushing over the carved line he had made earlier. Now there were dozens, marks of himself carved over and over, proof of countless passes. His mind reeled. Had he been looping for minutes? Or had he lived entire lifetimes circling this cursed road? A sound broke the monotony. The church bell rang, once sharp, unnatural. It reverberated down the street, though no hand pulled the rope. Adrian lifted his head, eyes heavy, heart racing. The bell tolled again, and the whispers grew louder, pressing in from windows and doorways. Figures began to gather at the edges of his vision, faint silhouettes stitched from dust and shadow. They stood in place waiting, perhaps for him to break, perhaps for him to surrender. The horror of the street was not its endless repetition, but the awareness it created that he himself was part of the loop. Each step, each breath, each choice had already been made and would be made again. The town wasn't holding him captive. It was simply replaying what he had already done. His agency was an illusion. With trembling hands, Adrian carved one more line into the wooden beam, deeper than the rest. The sound of the bell echoed again, and when he turned, the church and the store still waited, frozen in expectation. He realized the cruelest truth of all. No matter how many times he walked, no matter how deeply he carved, the street was not repeating. The first time the church bell rang, Adrian thought it was a hallucination. The air of Bodie had been silent for so long that the metallic toll sounded alien, like thunder underwater. It did not belong to a ghost town where time itself seemed frozen. Yet there it was, deep, resonant and lonely, echoing through streets that should not have carried sound at all. He staggered toward the church, the only building still upright with a semblance of dignity. Its steeple rose like a broken finger against the pale sky, and the rope to the bell tower swayed as if an unseen hand had just released it. Adrian stepped inside. Dust cascaded from the rafters. Wooden pews lay crooked, their varnish long since eaten by rot. The altar stood in shadows, draped in a torn cloth. The rope hung before him, unmoving now, but still warm to the touch, as though gripped by something living. The bell rang again. This time, Adrian did not see the rope move. The sound came from above, too heavy and sharp, vibrating through the wooden floor beneath his boots. He climbed the stairs to the bell tower, each step protesting with a groan. The air grew colder as he ascended, pressing against his skin like invisible hands. At the top, he found the massive iron bell swaying gently, but no one was there. Carved into the metal, faint yet deliberate, were words in a language he didn't recognize. They curled around the circumference like scars. When he touched the surface, visions bloomed in his mind, images of processions long gone, funerals carried through the dusty streets, weddings that ended in screams, sermons delivered to hollow-eyed congregations. He pulled his hand away, but the images clung to him, as though the bell itself had chosen to share its memory. The bell tolled again, and this time the sound was not empty. Voices accompanied it. They rose with the vibration, whispers that layered into a choir of the damned. They spoke his name. Not once, but again and again, from every corner of the tower. Adrian. The syllables stretched like echoes pulled thin across eternity. He staggered back, nearly tumbling down the stairwell. His breath came sharp, his mind spiraling. He realized the bell was not announcing the hour, it was announcing him. Each toll marked his presence, sealing it into body like a brand. The town was declaring him part of its endless cycle. Every ring bound him tighter to the ghost of the place. Desperate, he descended into the nave, hoping to escape. But the church had changed. The pews were now occupied. Figures sat in rows, perfectly still, their faces blank and pale as chalk. Each wore clothes of another era, minors, widows, children, gamblers. None moved, none breathed, yet their heads turned in unison to follow him as he stumbled toward the door. The bell rang above them, and their mouths opened, soundless but synchronized. Their hollow faces strained with the shape of his name. Adrian shoved the doors open and stumbled back into the street. The town was silent once more, but the echo of the bell persisted, vibrating deep inside his chest like a second heartbeat. Every few minutes, it rang again, whether he stood still, walked, or tried to hide. There was no rhythm to its tolls, no pattern he could predict. It would strike in the middle of his steps, or while he breathed, or just as his eyelids drifted closed, always alone, always marking him. He began to wonder if the bell was not outside at all, but inside him, planted like a seed, ringing from within his skull. On the third day, or what he thought was a day, the bell changed. It tolled not once, but thrice in succession. With each strike, the ground beneath Bodie quivered, dust rising in lazy spirals. The buildings trembled. Windows cracked. Then, with mechanical precision, it lifted its hand and mimicked his gesture. A second toll thundered, and more silhouettes appeared, each molded in his likeness. Adrian had grown accustomed to the strange rhythm of Bodie, the way time bent, the way whispers overlapped, the way the town felt alive though its people were long gone. But nothing prepared him for the moment he saw himself. It began at dusk. The streets had grown unnaturally quiet, the wind falling still as though it too waited. Adrian walked toward the abandoned mine shaft at the edge of town, lantern in hand. The old wood beams groaned, and the air smelled of rust, dust, and sorrow. He had passed by this place before, always resisting the urge to enter. Tonight, however, the pull was different, like an unseen hand urging him forward. Inside, shadows clung to the walls. The lantern's flame trembled, though no breeze touched it. The deeper he went, the more his footsteps echoed, as if someone followed half a beat behind. His skin prickled, his breath turned shallow. Then he saw him, At the far end of the tunnel, a figure stepped into the dim circle of light. The man wore Adrian's boots, his jacket, even the lantern he himself carried. But the face, though unmistakably his, was not alive. The eyes were too wide, staring with frozen intensity. The lips moved soundlessly, echoing words Adrian could not hear but somehow understood. "You should not be here." Adrian froze, heart pounding hard. The figure tilted its head, mirroring his every move, slightly delayed, as if reality lagged. When Adrian lifted his lantern, the figure did the same, but its flame burned black, a sickly smoke curling into the air. He stumbled backward, but the doppelganger advanced. Each step reverberated like a death knell. Adrian wanted to scream, but his throat locked. When the figure's mouth opened impossibly wide, Adrian felt his own jaw ache as if forced to mimic it. A terror whispered that this was no ghost. This was the town trying to erase him, to replace him. The lantern flickered violently. Shadows twisted on the walls, no longer his own. Behind the doppelganger, more figures emerged, blurred versions of himself, all carrying black flames, all whispering in unison. "Stay. Stay, stay." Adrian clutched his lantern and ran. The mine seemed endless, corridors splitting and merging in senseless ways. Everywhere he turned, the doppelganger waited, its dead eyes locked on his. His lungs burned, his legs screamed, yet the echo of his other selves chased him without pause. He felt certain that no matter how far he ran, he would only circle back into their grasp. At last, he burst out into the night, collapsing onto the dirt. The sky above shimmered faintly, wrong in some subtle way. The doppelganger did not follow, but its presence lingered. Adrian knew he hadn't escaped. Something had been set in motion. The mine had shown him his replacement, and the town would not let go until the exchange was complete. That night he could not sleep. Even in the fragile safety of the abandoned house he claimed as shelter, he felt watched. When he closed his eyes, he saw the doppelganger at the edge of his bed, flame burning black, whispering without sound. When he forced his eyes open, the vision dissolved, but the scent of smoke lingered and faint scorch marks stained the floor. Hours passed. At every sound, a floorboard creak, the sigh of wind, Adrian jolted awake. His reflection in the cracked mirror no longer aligned perfectly. A blink came half a second late. A smile lingered too long. Once he leaned forward, but his reflection did not. It stared back, waiting. When he turned away, it moved just slightly, independent of him. By dawn, Adrian realized the doppelganger had not been confined to the mine. It had followed him, settling into every surface that held his likeness. Puddles, windows, even the lantern itself. Each reflection carried that same dead gaze, a warning or a promise. The townsfolk of Bodie, the unseen whispers, seemed to respond. The echoes in the saloon grew louder, doors creaked open. Objects shifted just enough to catch his eye. The whole ghost town seemed to approve, as though his replacement was nearly complete. Yet a darker thought gnawed. What if the doppelganger was not only trying to replace him, but also free him? What if the town demanded a permanent occupant, and in taking his likeness it offered release? But release into where? Darkness? Nothingness? Or something far worse? Adrian gripped his lantern and whispered, "I am still me. I am still here." But the flame guttered low, and in the cracked mirror, his reflection smiled when he did not. At the very end of the deserted street, one light remained alive, an old lantern, burning without fuel. Its flame bent and swayed in the wind as if it breathed, as if the fire itself held memory instead of heat. I walked closer with hesitant steps, feeling the silence of the town tightening around me. The glass of the lantern was fogged from the inside, and across its trembling surface the outlines of the town began to appear, not as past, not as present, but as a script rewriting itself in real time. Windows shifted shape, doors returned to places they once belonged, faded signs regained their lost letters. The town rehearsed itself like an actor repeating the same scene, terrified to forget a single line. I understood then that the lantern was not a simple guide, but a ruthless editor. Its glow was a hand stitching fragments together, forcing the town to repeat until the version became flawless. The flame leaned as though pointing, and I followed its command toward a warehouse at the corner. By record, it had burned decades ago, yet here it stood, rebuilt without scars. Inside hung rows of miners' helmets, straps dangling like veins waiting for blood that would never flow again. The air itself whispered in a language older than memory, "If one comes back, all will return." On a desk lay the attendance book. Every name from the town's long story was written there, some faintly crossed, others rewritten with strokes so dark they tore the paper. At the bottom, a blank space waited, open like a mouth about to swallow. My fingers closed around the pen. If I wrote my name, would the town finally rest, or would I be copied into its endless cycle, forced to replay days I had never lived? The flame flickered impatiently, urging me, but I shut the book. The lantern shuddered in my grasp. Angry, sputtering violent light across the cracked walls. Outside, I saw the street double itself, 2 layers overlapping like a misprinted page. One was real, one was waiting. I stepped onto the first. The second wavered behind, greedy, hungry for my decision. "You do not need my name," I told the light. "You need a final witness." At once, the flame leaned away from its wick, and the wall bloomed with a shadow. A faceless miner, helmet in hand, pausing before a doorway that had never existed. From the houses around me rose a chorus of whispers, countless voices speaking in ragged unison, end where it began. The words followed me as I carried the lantern back to the crossroads, where the wooden signposts still stood, their letters gnawed away by time. At the center yawned the dry well. I leaned over and held the lantern above it, staring into the dark. At the bottom, I saw not water but a black mirror. The sky turned negative, a surface that reflected what should remain unseen. For a long moment, the flame gazed into its own reflection. Then it died. Silence seized the town, a silence so complete I could hear the weight of my own heart. No bell, no echo, no repetition. Even the wind forgot to move. I stood frozen, afraid that even breathing might restart the cycle. Then from the dead wick, a single spark bloomed. The fire returned, smaller now, trembling like a child waking from a nightmare. It no longer acted as editor, it acted as memory keeper. It showed me one last vision. The townsfolk gathered along the street, waving farewell to one another, each pretending to depart, though none truly left. The image shimmered, then folded like a piece of paper, sealed into an invisible letter. I placed the lantern on the lip of the well and left it to shine downward, into the abyss. Slowly, the duplicate street dissolved, peeling away like old paint, leaving only one road behind. The names in the book returned to their ordinary weight, no longer rewritten, no longer crossed out by unseen hands. Perhaps the town does not wait anymore. Perhaps it has only learned to set its past where it can be found without forcing anyone to relive it again and again. Perhaps repetition was only its way of pleading not to be forgotten. I wondered if memory itself needs to keep circling until someone dares to look directly into it, to accept its weight without fear, to carry its echo like a lantern of their own. And if, one night, you pass through this place and notice a faint light hanging above the well, do not approach it. Do not call out. Simply raise your hand in a quiet farewell. Whatever was left behind already knows the way home, and the lantern, the final lantern, will continue to burn for as long as memory itself requires a witness. Its glow will outlast footsteps, outlast silence, and maybe even outlast the town itself. And perhaps when every road has vanished and even the wind has forgotten its direction, that glow will still tremble, waiting for someone brave enough to see it without turning away. Adrian thought the well had closed its chapter with the lantern's final glow. But endings are never so merciful. He stood at the crossroads, lantern in hand, convinced the silence meant freedom. Yet silence in this town was only the skin of something breathing beneath. The whispers slid back into him, not with volume but with certainty, like a memory returning uninvited. They called his name without speaking it. They reminded him of every pause, every hesitation, as though the town itself had memorized his heartbeat. Visual note, Adrian, mid-30s, unshaven, weary, holding a lantern, eyes reflecting exhaustion and dread. Adrian forced himself down the road. The earth bent like paper, folding into the same streets he thought he had escaped. A saloon leaned at an angle only to right itself as he blinked. Doors shut where no one lived. The sound of boots followed, though his own were still. He whispered to himself that he was leaving, but every turn spilled him back into the square where the lantern swayed, alive, waiting. "Carry us," the whispers urged. "Carry what we are." Adrian clenched the handle until his knuckles whitened. The flame within the glass wavered, revealing faces he could not name. Children with hollow eyes, miners with broken mouths, women mouthing words he almost understood. The flame bent toward him as if drinking from his breath. He recoiled, but the image of betrayal burned sharper each time he looked away. Maybe the town had never wanted salvation. Maybe it only craved witness. The lantern was not a key to release, but a chain disguised as light. Adrian's refusal to write his name in the book had not freed him. It had crowned him. The town had chosen him, and its voice spread inside his chest like a second set of lungs. He stumbled toward the horizon. Beyond the last house, there was nothing but stillness. A black wall painted to look like distance. Adrian tried to convince himself he was free, yet the lantern bobbed in every reflection he passed. A broken bottle, a puddle without rain, the dark hollows of his own eyes. He pressed his palms to his ears, but the whispers dug through thought instead of sound. They grew gentler, more intimate, patient as vines wrapping stone. "Memory must endure," they told him. Adrian's throat tightened. He realized he was not meant to be a man leaving. He was meant to be a page, a story, a vessel waiting for words that would never truly be his. Each repetition would erase him further, until only the flame and the whispers remained. He stood at the edge of choice, step into the void or turn back to the square. But the two paths pulsed with the same breath, and Adrian knew whichever way he moved, he would still belong. The town had already written him in its margins. Freedom was an illusion it dangled to keep him walking. The lantern flared once, spilling color over the empty street. Figures emerged around him, faces kind, faces desperate, faces hungry. Adrian's knees trembled. Were they welcoming him or waiting for him to fall? He wanted to ask, but his voice fractured, absorbed by the air before it left his lips. He saw their mouths forming words he would soon speak himself, unaware he was repeating them. And if you ever walk a road where no wind moves, if you see a light swaying where no source should exist, remember this: the witness is never gone. The lantern always finds a hand. The town always finds a listener. It does not matter if it is Adrian or another after him. What matters is the cycle, endless, patient, complete. Perhaps even now the flame leans toward you, tugging your gaze. You should not answer it. But once you have noticed, you already have. That is the trick. That is how the town survives. Adrian once thought he had left. He thought the whispers belonged to the dark behind him. But they speak still between his thoughts, shaping silence into language. He does not know if he is walking out or being carried back. The difference is small. The difference may not exist at all. And somewhere beyond the reach of your vision, the whispers wait. They are waiting for you,